In our modern world, we sometimes take comfort for granted. We expect for our fare a very smooth journey on our railways, and for the most part we get it. But if it wasn't for one component, despite the smooth rails, the ride would be unbearable, and that's the humble spring. Springs, more notably the leaf spring, has been around in some form or another for hundreds of years. But it was Obadiah Elliott that patented the leaf spring that we associate with today, and his design was key in taking steam engines from being static to being able to move. Rail technology was still in its infancy, and rails were prone to breaking. If a steam engine and its carriages had no suspension, all the vibration from the engine would travel down to the rails. The weight would not be distributed evenly, and any irregularity in the railhead would not be absorbed, causing at worst the engine to lose contact with the railhead, and when it bounced back, usually the rails took the brunt. So the challenge was to find the perfect spring. A spring that was not too soft that would cause bounce, but not too hard that it would fail to absorb shocks. The springs would have to adapt to a non-standard market and would have to be able to be produced on an industrial scale. The call was taken up by the city of Sheffield. It made sense. The city was well known for its steel works, and the components for making leaf springs was simple enough, and the tools were readily available in many workshops. It didn't take any specialist equipment, considering many toolmakers had what was required, and it was a simple and cost-effective change to making springs. The workers were also highly skilled in ironmongery, and training required would be minimal. By 1841, one ironmonger, a place called Bradley's, had taken the opportunity to make railway springs, and despite Sheffield not having a locomotive works, others took the plunge as well. With locomotive works Fenton, Murray and Wood, and Kitson of Hunslet not far, it still opened up good trade, especially as the production of locomotives was ramping up. In the first 10 years of production, over 20 companies had switched to making railway springs. Conditions for the workers, however, was less prosperous. Children as young as 10 or 12 would be sent to work, and the very nature of the job caused horrendous injuries and even death. The shop floor would be hot, and the machines would lack any form of safety features. It was said you had to be cut from a particular cloth to work on sprung steel. For the many that were attracted to the allure of the work, the reality made some turn to drink. There was a limited future on the floor, and while the outsiders admired the men's skills, it was estimated that less than 20% of them were educated in the most basic of literacy skills. Even though the railway mania had burst by 1850, Sheffield Industries was booming, and by 1870 over 15,000 miles of railway had been built, all the lines running locomotives, carriages and wagons, and every one needing springs. It was estimated that there was nearly 200,000 vehicles on the network, with many more being built, and although some works now carried fabrication shops, leaf springs could be made, it was still Sheffield that took the lead. It had established itself as a major contributor to the city's economy, and the small foundries had evolved and merged into larger factories. But beyond the 1870s, the industrial mood changed, and there was a decline in the air. The spring trade was beginning to feel the weight of its own success. As the recession hit, railway companies moved less freight, and passenger numbers declined. This in turn meant less wagon and engine repair, and a decline in new engines and rolling stock. The Sheffield bosses acted in the only way they could: lay off workers and cut wages. By 1895, after decades of uncertainty, the economy finally began to lift, with many spring makers weathering the storm, and orders began to flood in again. It was a second era for new steam, and Sheffield was ready to dominate the market. But with the advancement of the motorcar and tram engines, the spring industry began to branch out. When the First World War broke out, the foundries, like many, turned to making items for the war effort, with women taking up the shortfall as the workers went to war. After the war, the motor car was becoming more and more common, and factories had to adapt to making smaller springs, and as the demand grew, the demand for railway leaf springs began to decline. Samuel Fox Springs, a well-established spring factory, turned its work to motor springs almost exclusively, so much so that over 60% of heavy road vehicles such as buses and lorries ran on their springs. After the Second World War, investment was promised in the railway. The war had created a backlog of broken railway engines and rolling stock, and British Railways was determined to get as much stock back on track as possible. The spring makers were excited at the prospect of getting new orders, and now there was almost 1 million railway vehicles, many in need of repair, and it would have been amazing if it wasn't for one thing: roads. The advancement of the war was filtering down to the public market, and an age of prosperity allowed the modern consumer to have cars for the first time. Trucks and lorries gave factories more flexibility, and better roads made the journeys easier. It was a disaster for the spring market as thousands of trucks, flatbeds, coaches and engines were scrapped. By 1963, less than 250,000 springs had been made, compared to 12 million a decade earlier. In 1967, British Steel came under national ownership, and this included the spring industries. The nationalisation rationalised the spring factories, with many factories closing or moving to alternate trades. While the larger factories conformed, the smaller one began to prosper. The smaller individual foundries called themselves specialist spring makers, and while the market was simply too small for the large foundries to make any form of profit, the smaller market was perfect for the small works to move in. This too soon came under threat in the 1970s as British Rail began to fabricate its own springs, saving on freight. By the mid-1990s and at the end of British Rail, almost all spring production in Sheffield had all but stopped. But even with most springs fabricated on site or imported, spring production in Sheffield still carries on in a rather unusual market. And it's a market that, if in any other country, might not work: heritage. The UK, considering its size, has the most heritage railways. Closures in the 1960s meant that many clotheslines simply turned into heritage lines, and as the old engines ran again, leaf springs were back in demand. Rotherham's Owen Springs uses old plans and techniques to help supply the heritage railway market. The company even makes old springs for classic cars and buses. In Sheffield itself, TSL Turnton supply large black springs, but also to provide a healthy heritage market, with the Institute of Spring Technology called Sheffield its home, and offers its help and expertise to railway industries as well as testing and research. Across the city, the history of its sprung past can be found, especially on old factory buildings. And while the scale of production has decreased, its importance to railway history is as crucial now as it once was.